All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucas. I'm going to be your Masters of Ceremony and host today. If I can ask my field speaker to activate their webcam as well, that would be awesome. All right, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first Tech Break. Tech Break is the online version of the Tech Lunch that you may know, an event organized offline, in person in the Algolia offices usually. So this is our first online version. It was supposed to happen on Livestorm. Unfortunately, there seems to have a few problems. So back on Zoom, thank you everyone for staying with us. And today, we're going to talk about product testing. My name is Lucas. I'm a lead product manager at Algolia, and I'm super proud to introduce three panelists today. The first one is Marine Diaz. Say hello, Marine. Marine has been a user researcher for more than 4 years now and helps the Algolia product team build better product, turning user feedback into actionable knowledge. She's also taking care of the mentorship program of the Hexagon UX Paris community and is involved in ResearchOps community as well. We also have with us Grady Slane today, product manager at Pendo. Hello, Grady. Grady is a group product manager where he oversees Pendo's enterprise product strategy. Prior to joining Pendo, Grady helped shape the workplace strategy and shift to SaaS at Citrix System. Grady has worked in product since 2012 and is passionate about uncovering market opportunities and identifying the hidden needs of customers that drive their purchasing decision. And finally, we also have Gerardo Hernandez. Hello, Gerardo. So Gerardo is a product marketing manager at A/B Testy. For the last 4 years, he helped tech startups expand their reach and tell better stories. As a member of the product marketing team at A/B Testy, Gerardo acts as an advocate for customers throughout the product development and the go-to-market process. So unfortunately, we are not on Livestorm, so it's going to be a bit more tricky to ask questions, but feel free to use the chat that you have on Zoom. You should have a little bubble somewhere behind your head. Feel free to chat during the panel. I'll make sure to keep an eye on that. And at the end, we're going to keep time for that as well. Now that everyone is comfortably settled at home, let's start. First of all, what's a day in your life looks like? What's one day in your shoes? Gerardo, for instance, tell me a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to talk a little bit about that. So, I think compared to some of the other people on the panel today, my life's a little interesting being on the marketing side of the product team. We work a lot with, or my day-to-day is a lot of speaking with with sales. We're talking with the customer team, going along on sales calls, talking to current customers to really try to understand how the impact of the product after it's already in the market and in the hands of customers. And then going back to the product team and also, finding what's the alignment between what we already have out there, what customers are saying, and then what's in our roadmap and, what's coming next. So I would say that I spend about 40% of my time, I would say, in meetings, and then the rest of the time is kind of taking all of the notes, insights, and stuff from meetings together and bringing them to different people on the teams.
Sounds good. Grady, Marine?
So first of all, thanks for having me. So I think that a lot of my time is spent in meetings as well, whether it's syncing up with my team members, my product team, my engineers, et cetera. But I'm also, doing a lot of collaboration with various parts of the organization to see a product strategy through successfully. So that's success, that's sales, it's product marketing, it's product operations. Fortunately, though, a lot of the time that I spend in meetings is actually with customers. So I probably average 1 to 2 customer discussions a day. Ideally, I try and get as deep into those conversations and the needs of those customers as possible. And then, outside of that, it's just a lot of planning and a lot of ideating with folks like, our design team members to try and think through the best possible experiences for our customers and how we can conduct little experiments along the way to make sure we're on the right track.
Mine.
Yes, hi everyone. So I work very closely with PMs and designers. So I spend most of my time with these, and it's either planning, research. So what do we want to learn? How are we going to gather that feedback? Or actually conducting studies, so talking to users with my fellow designers and PMs. And there's a big part of analyzing what has been said and how to activate the feedback we have been gathering. So that's it for me.
Sounds good. Thank you. Before we jump into more of what is product testing at your different company, I'm a bit curious regarding the audience. So please type in the chat, for instance, how many times you're doing per day or per week, how many times you have product testing related activities, while we continue with our speakers. So first question for you, Grady, can you give us a bit of overview of what is product testing in your company? What does that look like?
Sure. So I think testing can take many different forms. A lot of what we're doing is probably similar to what most of other tech companies are doing. We do a lot of closed and open betas. We do a lot of design-led experiments focused more on like usability and desirability, where we're trying to validate concepts before we actually try and build them. We do some in-product surveys from time to time to make sure that there's a mass of people that are interested in something before we actually go and build it. I think that actually being at Pendo, though, we have the ability to kind of dog food our own product and take advantage of some capabilities that prior to joining this company, I think I would have really appreciated having. So things like having really robust in-product analytics so I can see what in the product today is resonating with customers and what isn't, and maybe where we can optimize things. Just having kind of that broader vision around where things need to be improved, or having the ability to embed little things in the experience purely from a design perspective without any kind of engineering. So buttons or whatever that might indicate that people are very interested in a capability that doesn't actually exist, but it seems real to the customer. And then also I spend a lot of time in Pendo feedback, which is almost like a customer forum where we can collect feature ideas and suggestions from our customers, and they can vote on those ideas. And that becomes a nice way for us to kind of triage and prioritize what things we may want to build or what experiments we want to conduct as well.
Yes.
Thank you. So what's great today is we have a mix of user researcher, product manager, product marketing manager. Sorry, mine cut you off, but I'm super interested in what looks similar or is different.
Well, actually, it sounds a lot. It's quite similar to what we do have. It's also either testing ideas for new features at the very beginning of the product development process, or testing products that already exist or that are launching, such as betas, like you mentioned. Given the different stages we are in, we'll have different testing strategies to deploy. And so you have either ongoing continuous feedback via analytics, for instance, just like you mentioned, or given the stage, like I said, given the stage and given what the team expects, we can trigger moderated or unmoderated testing, or live or remote testing, or test it with different level of users. I'd say either real users of your product, or potential users, or even people within Algolia, because as we are selling a B2B product, recruiting is quite hard for us. And so Algolians can sometimes be good testers. So given where we are and what we're looking for, we can trigger those different levels of testing.
Sounds good. Gerardo, A/B Test is obviously also a tech company similar to Algolia and Pendo. When you join, I often hear that it's a question about culture. How can you define this product testing culture inside of A/B testing?
Yeah, I think that's definitely, the starting point for all of our test ideas is you have to, you have to get the whole team on board with the idea that everybody's responsible for, innovation, and that everybody has a stake in the metrics that are going to define whether you're an innovative company or not. So, when you have that in place, it makes it very easy for everybody in the organization to be able to come in, and whether it's through, user feedback, internal feedback, anything like that, give ideas on, what the next steps should be, whether for, existing features, for new features, for new product lines entirely. And then from there, we, I think like Grady was saying, the dog fooding is a really big part of what we do, except we like to call it drinking our own champagne. So especially with Flagship, it's really easy for us to make sure that whenever we're releasing something new, release it first to internal users and make sure that it's actually working the way it was intended and solving the problem that we were hoping it's solving. And then from there, slowly releasing it progressively to more and more users, whether it's early adopters and then general availability. But measuring, the whole time you have to keep the metrics front and center to make sure that you're actually being successful, and not just testing without, because if you're not learning and if you're not looking at that, then the testing kind of becomes pointless at that point.
Sounds good. And I definitely like using champagne instead of dog fooding as a French person. So I will use that one again. So if you were to put to help our viewers today, let's get into the concrete as to how you're making this happen concretely at your company. We frequently get questions on how to include product testing in the actual development from an idea to a feature. So what does that look like concretely in terms of process, or how to properly integrate it? Mine, you want to go first, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Different strategies here. So at the very beginning of the quarter at Algolia, we have a kickoff week. During that week, we identify priority projects. And if those projects needs research and needs testing, then they'll have a user researcher embedded in the team. And so as a researcher, when you're in the team, you fit into the process and the meetings of the squad. And the idea is to deliver feedback in the right time so that you do not delay product development. So it can mean, for instance, a good way to achieve that in these days of lockdown is to launch unmoderated tests. What we did a few weeks ago with one squad is that we launched an unmoderated test on the Tuesday evening, and on Wednesday morning we had the test done, and we just had to analyze it. So that's an easy way to make it fast. Another way to maybe, and I'll let the others speak, another way maybe to make sure you don't take too much time, but you still get valuable feedback, is to, what we do for squads. We are not working as closely as the one that are prior, is to do some, office hours, or to give templates, or to give clear processes so that anyone in the company can jump in and set up their own test, and so that we can provide support so that they can make it on their own. And that's another way to help.
Gerardo, Grady, anything specific in terms of product cycle in your companies? Anything you doing maybe differently, or that you're a big fan of?
One thing that I really like that Marine pointed out is that you want to do the experimentation before you're actually committed to actually building the thing. If you're committed to building it, you don't have room for failure, and that leads to very poor outcomes when it comes to experimentation. Proper experimentation should really embrace failure as a viable outcome, and as part of the journey towards something great. So yeah, you want to conduct that prior to you being committed to actually building whatever that thing is. And then depending upon, and that's particularly for new features and new products. So doing as much of that experimentation upfront, and really doing a lot around validating demand for the capability, as opposed to things like feasibility. Your team should have a good understanding for how feasible certain things are before they're, before they become real ideas that you get to the point of actually testing. Most tech products in particular fail because they just simply aren't desirable enough. If we're talking about things that are already built, though, that's more of an optimization process, right? So that kind of experimentation where you're just tweaking and trying to move the needle a bit more can be continuous and doesn't necessarily need to be done in, let's say, the planning cycle before when you actually want to build it.
So I think you touched a very interesting notion, which is when do you actually decide to test an idea or a feature?
Personally, as soon as possible. My preference is to test ideas or features, particularly new ones, as cheaply, quickly, and inexpensively as possible. Ideally before a single line of code is written. So whether that's through design-oriented experiments or user experience mockups or embedding buttons into our product through Pendo that aren't actually real features in the product, they just look real or make it seem to the customer like it is a new feature that's available. This is the kind of things I'm looking for before I ever commit to building something. Part of this is wanting to have really solid data that I can take up the chain to show that this is, we're on the right track. But the other part is always just trying to sort of second guess myself and not inject my own ego or opinion into the product development cycle.
Gerardo? Oh, sorry, I'm good.
No, I totally agree with what you said, Grady. But maybe to build on top of that, sometimes it's hard to test everything, and you have to choose. And sometimes at Algolia we try to, for instance, if it's easy to undo, or if we work with a designer who's like super expert of data visualization on the analytics, for instance, then maybe just go with build it and see if it's working. If it's not too costful to do it, just do it. Sometimes but I 100% agree with what you just said, but just to like balance maybe.
I think it's a really great point. If it's easy to fix, then oftentimes it's just something that you can build. I completely agree with that. A lot of my commentary was around like new features, which oftentimes require a lot of upfront work, but you're 100% right. If it's easy or cheap to roll back, if it doesn't work, there's no harm in doing that oftentimes.
Something, at AB Tasty, just to add to that, something we like to do as early as possible whenever we start thinking about testing something is just getting all stakeholders involved in the conversation about what's going to be, so that everybody, has a say in what the next steps are going to be. So during, at the beginning of our 6-week cycle, before, like you're saying, Grady, before you even get to building anything, there is a conversation with, with sales, with the executive team, with customer success, where everybody just finds that alignment to make sure that what's actually going to be worked on in that cycle is a priority, and we understand, what the impact that we're looking for is, and all of that, so that we know when we need to roll something back quickly or something like that.
Can you walk us through this 6-week cycle? Is there a specific different product testing strategy already defined, or is it depending on the feature or the idea or the stage of the product that you decide to have different activities?
Yeah, I mean, it really, really depends on the, whether it's a new feature, whether it's something that's being, an existing optimization, or whether it's, a lot of the times it's just features that haven't gotten, love, to say something, in a while, that they just need to be revamped. And you need to think about whether, is it a complete overhaul, or is it something that can be just optimized, or is the feature even needed still, something that was developed 4 years ago, why do we have it still on the platform, and does it make sense with the current vision? So depending on what, where it falls in here, I think our product managers and our feature teams have a lot of leeway in deciding and setting the strategy for each specific feature. So it really depends what the feature is.
Can you pick an example? For example, the last feature you may have released and the kind of testing it went through.
I think, the easy, an easy example that I can think of would be for we're launching a new version of an API. We always want to make sure that it's working for of course, there's a lot of improvements that come with it, but there's one primary metric that we want to improve with this new API version. So we're going to find like a client to do like a POC with to make sure that before it's released publicly, it's actually working and solving the one metric that we care about. So in this case, it's being developed, but it's not going to be publicly released or go to market until we validate it with one client first, who is one of the people that requested this type of improvement in the first place.
That's a perfect transition. When you mention new metric, in the end, product testing is about success, understanding success, all failures. You mentioned failures as well. But how do you actually define it and then measure it? Like, do you have, depending on the technique you're using, do you have an example, or can you walk us through how you approach this problem? Grady, Marin, Gerardo, feel free to unmute yourself and just shoot.
So first of all, I think it depends on what we're testing and what we're optimizing. If it's something that's already in product or something that's built and it's more about optimization, what you're testing really could just be based against like the norm or the default, right? So do we see a lift in clicks or active usage or engagement as a result of this tweak relative to the control? So that's fairly straightforward. It's a lot harder when it's something net new. So like a new feature or a new product that you don't have a baseline for. And in those circumstances, it's really important to have kind of clearly stated hypotheses upfront around, what the expected behavior is and what the expected outcome is as a result of this particular feature, this particular interaction, particularly if you're going to build it. And then also making sure to time box your experiments. A lot of traps that people can sometimes find themselves in is that it doesn't quite work or we don't quite hit it, so we're going to tweak it a little bit. Not quite there, so we're going to tweak it a little bit more. There's an opportunity cost to not just dropping an idea and moving on to a new idea, just continuously cycling on the same idea and making minor tweaks to it. Sometimes it's okay to say, like, you know what, this didn't work, and we're gonna spend our time, energy, and money elsewhere. So time boxing these things is an important part of conducting effective experimentation, in my opinion.
Once again, I agree with what Grady just said. I think we have two very different cases. You have qualitative testing and quantitative testing, and on qualitative testing, it can be very hard to have objective metrics to follow. Something I like to do is to first have the squad, so PM, designers, and developers say, what do you expect from the test? What is your ideal path on these mockups, for instance? So the list, they say, oh, the user should understand that, and he should click there, and he should eventually the success is this and that. And so in the end, we can qualitatively say, okay, they have understood it or not, or it's working or not. And when you're going through this iteration, you can see how an understanding has evolved from a qualitative standpoint, but it's very not as straightforward as numbers. And something new we have tasted recently is a testing solution, which name is Maze. I don't know if you've heard about it, but basically it allows you to do some quantitative testing on mockups, so on usability test, which is quite new. And so you need a lot of testers. It's not the 5 testers and then you understand it, and then you have your feedback, but you need more testers. But what's nice is that within your mockups, you can introduce quantitative metrics, and you can have bounce rate, and you can have success, direct success, indirect success, and you can have some kind of quantitative understanding of what's happening on your mockups. But to be fair, that's something quite new for us at Algolia, but that we'd like to expand more.
Gerardo, I have a bit of tricky question and follow-up. Do you see any bad way or poor way of defining success, like any traps that people should avoid? Like Grady mentioned time boxing, but any others in your experience?
Well, I think, the easiest answer there is kind of one that Grady also talked a little bit about at the beginning, and is just getting too caught up in the idea that a successful test, or that successful testing depends on successful tests. So, if you don't have a way, or, you kind of at the beginning of when you're setting up your tests, you have to plan for failure in a way, so that that if the tests fails, you have a next step, and kind of what the learning is there, and it's not just a failed test that goes nowhere. So I would think that's one of the easiest ways to fail. The other one would be to just get too caught up in like the product metrics themselves, and whenever if you get too removed, if you're not tying or thinking about both the product usage, for example, and any business metrics that you might have. For example, at our company, when we talk about OKRs, whether we set our company OKRs that are most likely around revenue or around churn or something like that. If you are losing sight of these things and just focusing solely on the usage, you might not learn as much, or you might make a bad decision because you're not looking at the whole picture.
So when do you know that a test is over? When do you stop?
Well, when the feedback has been taken into account, I'd say. So I think it's tied to what Gerardo just said. When a test fails, it's actually good news. It means that you have a lot of work. and so something I like to do at the end of a test is it's a very like a to-do list of things that designers should fix. Not mentioning solutions. Solutions, it's really like what designers do. As a user researcher, I only highlight what's not working and what should be fixed. But make it very clear so that designer can work on it. And once the designers tick all the boxes, like I've worked on this, then the test is done for me.
Grady, another insight you want to share on this one?
Yeah, I mean, outside of time boxing it to make sure that like you're not allowing the test to run too long. Sometimes you can attain sufficient evidence in less time if the delta is really significant, right? Or if, for example, there is an overwhelming preference for a certain experience relative to another experience, or the interest is so tangible that customers are willing to part with something that is inherently valuable to them in the short term or immediately in exchange for trying to like prioritize the development of this feature. It's one of the things I'm always actively looking for, actually, whenever possible. And this isn't always possible, but whenever possible, I'm trying to identify opportunities to ask customers for some type of currency. And it doesn't have to be money. It could be something else that's really valuable to them, like their time. If I can get a customer to commit, even if I don't intend on following through with this, but if I can get a customer to commit to meeting with me every week for the next 9 weeks, time for many people is their most valuable currency. And if, from all the people that I'm interacting with, I can get them to part ways with that, because this feature that we're talking about developing is so critical to them, or so important to their workflow. There's probably, that lends it a lot of weight to the feature being really worth developing, delivering a high amount of value. So there's not really like, a super clear, like this is always when your test should end. I mean, a lot of it, you can kind of just tell by how significant the feedback is. I think where it gets more challenging is when the delta is a lot more minimal, right? So it's like, oh yeah, this is, there's a slight preference for this. And then it's really a question of, okay, there's an expression, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? So do we go through the engineering time and effort to develop this, even if like the expected delta is only moderate, right? So.
Sounds good. Now that we know a bit more about your process, I'm a bit more interested in the techniques themselves. We mentioned quite a few already, from under-market testing to talking to customers, from doing POC, from reading metrics. If you had to keep only one, like if you're one that you're using most of the time, I expect it's a bit quite different between product marketing, product managers, and user researcher. So which one do you actually perform the most, and why do you think this one is useful? Like what do you get out of it that is maybe more than the other techniques? Gerardo?
I mean, I think for me, you know, and this is probably, you know, my perspective as a marketer, but I think for me the POC is probably the one that's the most important to me, because it's, you know, one thing to have, you know, when you're actually getting somebody using it, and
I'm
there's
sorry,
like
Gerardo, I don't think
terms involved.
we...
I like Grady was talking about currencies. That's a...
Is it me lagging
Sorry,
or is it Gerardo? I feel like it's Gerardo that we cannot hear so well. Correct me if I'm wrong. Grady, do you want to share a bit more while we make sure Gerardo internet comes back?
And again, the question was, do you have a favorite technique? Is that right?
Yes, correct.
I touched on this already, but I love trying to have some kind of currency whenever possible. That's my personal favorite preference, because I generally believe that people, particularly in context of like qualitative experimentation, so UX mockups or things like that, that people are trying to be honest with you, but they may not be able to accurately predict how they would behave if the situation was actually real, even if they're trying to be honest. So trying to secure some kind of, you know, exchange of currency in the moment, right? And it could be, again, them just parting ways with time, is validation now that what you're working on is sufficiently important to them to where they're willing to part ways with something that really they do value, like their time, and is clear indication of like the feature being worth developing. Then, you know, deltas in terms of you know, well, usability is somewhat improved here, et cetera. So that's my personal favorite technique, but we rely on a lot of things. That's just a preference of mine.
Mine?
Yes, let me mention two techniques I really like. One,
only one.
Oh no, no, but I really like yeah, skin in the game testing, like what we did very recently. We just launched a beta, a feature in beta, and we discovered the feature with the beta testers. So it was really nice to be there online to discover the features through their eyes and see if they do interact with the feature the way we expected. And as they are dealing with their own dashboard, their own version of Algolia, it's really like you see if they do use it or not, and you understand why they hesitate or not, and why it's a good what's working or not in your product. So I love it. But to be fair, probably one we use a lot at Algolia is the testing corner. So it's internal testing for very early stage ideas. So it's not with real users, so that's why it's a bit tricky, but it's very useful because it allows us to validate very quickly ideas, like I mentioned, and it also allows us to include in the product development process the whole company, and salespersons, marketing persons, CSMs. So all these people who deal with customers all the time and get the chance to influence the product. I think it's really important too. So I'd say skin in the game testing and testing corner.
Thank you. So that actually touched the question we have in the chat from Safa asking if we manage to involve more roles than product in the research and testing. Gerardo, I'm curious to how you would answer that question around who's involved in the testing, and do you have more roles than just products at your company taking part?
Yes, definitely. We do. And I think this is similar to what Maureen was just talking about, where it's not, you know, we don't exactly have a testing corner, but whenever we release features internally, we do make an announcement to the whole company, so that, for example, if it was, you know, a lot of times if it's feedback that comes from the CSMs or a request that, you know, sales has been getting a lot in demos, for example, so that the people who have actually been getting the requests or fielding these are the ones, or the first ones to use the feature, and, you know, let us know, let the product team know whether we're headed in the right direction, or, you know, just stop and let's, you know, think about this from the beginning.
Grady? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that you should involve other folks in the company. You know, as a product manager, it's my job to know customers. As ideally, I'm supposed to know the customers better than anyone else in the company, particularly the customers in my segment. But realistically speaking, there is so much knowledge that I'm never going to be able to attain that does exist within our organization and amongst particularly customer-facing individuals in the organization, folks like those in customer success, those in sales who, you know, I'm lucky if I get to have 2 to 3 customer conversations a day. They're having, you know, 6 to 10 customer conversations a day. To be able to tap into that knowledge and really have their involvement in terms of shaping things before we actually even build anything, I think is really valuable. So you should absolutely be making the best use of the tribal knowledge that exists within your organization as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that they should be shaping the roadmap, right? But in terms of weighing in and providing constructive feedback for things that you're considering or you think have like a strategic opportunity for your business, absolutely.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end. I still have 1 or 2 questions for our speakers. So again, for audience, don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat and we'll get back to them right after this one. So very quickly, if you had only one advice for viewers that are looking to improve how they test their products, what would be the most important one if you haven't said it yet? Marine, I can see you nodding.
I think it's a tough question, but I'd probably say, well, it really depends on the context, but with the lockdown we are in, probably take more time, take a step back, either to do what you used to do, but with more care and see how to improve it, or to test new things, new tools. I'd say, yeah, take some time for you and to reflect on what you do would be probably the most, well, that's something I try to do, at least.
Thank you. Gerardo?
The most important thing you can do is think about the why, and just, whenever you want to, add something to your test, your test roadmap or your list of test ideas, you want to make sure that you know why that's something that you want to test. And sometimes thinking about that is going to uncover something that's maybe more urgent or something else that you should be focusing on. And that's also makes it easier to go to, if you need buy-in, whether it's from, a manager, from the executive team, from other teams in your organization, having a really strong opinion about why you think something, is why you believe in this hypothesis or believe it's worth pursuing, is going to make it easier to have those conversations.
Reddy, what about you? What's your one advice?
My one piece of advice, and this is somewhat cultural, but it's important to understand and embrace the fact that failure is a necessary step on the road to greatness. If you don't have a tolerance for failing early on in the process, you're going to have a culture, it's probably indicative of a culture that is very intolerant of failure over the long term. It is far preferable to fail at the very onset when the amount of time, money, energy, etc., invested in a project is very minimal, and to pivot or adjust course or tweak as necessary then to get months into a project and for things to not be working out at that point. So if you don't have a tolerance for failure initially, you stand almost no chance of actually succeeding in the long term, because you'll be far too committed to a particular vision that you're going to be very reluctant to change direction from.
I couldn't agree more. And so next question, even a bit more challenging for you. As you said, we do all fails. We are not perfect, and our process are not perfect. So what's your next challenge in terms of product testing in your company? If you have to improve one thing, or if you're trying to improve one thing, what is it currently? Gerardo?
you know, I think for us, the one thing that we can definitely do more of is use our product more. There's just like, you know, I think for us specifically, there's so many things that we can test with both, like, you know, our client side solution and the server side one, that I feel like a lot of the times we're just, we realize a little late in the game, you know, that, oh, we could have done this test earlier, or there's an easy way to do this. So just, I think that's a big part of getting everybody on board with like using the tools every day to really just make sure that we're actually testing things, drinking our own champagne from the very beginning.
Sounds good. Mine?
Yes, it's a tough one. I'd say that something that is not related only to product testing, but maybe to research in general, is how do we make sure the feedback we gather on one piece of the product can be reused by the other squads or the other part of the product team, and how do we ensure that we don't just do one ad hoc test, but actually we leverage it for as many people as possible. And so that idea of gathering knowledge, user knowledge somewhere and build on top of this, I think that's one of the main challenges I see.
Sounds good. Grady?
I'm going to touch on a point actually Gerardo made earlier in the call. And forgive me if I butcher this, but I think he said, or Gerardo, you said that innovation is everyone's responsibility. I love that mentality. I think that is dead on. It's also a tough mentality or cultural shift to enforce in an organization, particularly when people are really, you know, have a lot going on in their everyday actual job responsibilities, whether it's sales, success, marketing, you name it, folks outside of the product org specifically. But I think that that's something that personally we could improve upon, and I think that we can grow. Just making sure that people understand that it's not just something, it's not just an opportunity, but it's a responsibility. It's something that you can actually not just own and take part of, but help shape the direction of the company, democratizing that process of innovation as much as possible. I'm a big believer in leveraging the entire brain power of your organization. And if you only have a few people in the organization that are really thinking through, you know, innovation, for example, you likely don't have the velocity that your organization is capable of doing in an ideal world. So I think that that's something where we could grow personally at our company, but we're making strides along the way.
Sounds good. So I don't think we have any question in the chat. Again, last chance. Otherwise, it's going to be my last question. Do you have any tools you recommend? What's your toolbox as a product tester, and what do you recommend to other people? Want to go first? Grady?
Sure. So, I mean, some of the tools that we've had a lot of success with, things like Figma for putting together mock-ups that don't require any kind of engineering work whatsoever. Of course, conducting surveys, but I'm going to do a shameless pitch for my company's product, Pendo, because it is actually a really powerful tool for conducting tests and experimentation. So it really is like a laboratory for understanding how your users are using your product and empowering you to collect their feedback, to understand what people care about most, and also to conduct little lightweight experiments like inserting buttons or conducting polls or NPS surveys and things like that to help you better understand your users. I'm fairly new to Pendo. I've been there a little over 6 months now, but I'm still learning about all the powerful ways that our product enables me to really understand my users better and to conduct these kind of experiments. So.
Sounds good. And we do have a question from Alex, and I think, Marine, you touched that a little bit, but we talked about a testing feature, but any advice for change in the UI that some of the users are not going to be okay with? Any advice for Alex?
Yes, so the thing is, testing UI is always a bit tricky, and testing is mostly about UX. So is it understandable? Can people read? Can people achieve any task that they have to achieve on the mockups or on the feature? So as long as the UI does not prevent the users to do or understand what they have to do, or understand what they have to understand, at some point it's not something that I don't advise to test the color of your button unless the color of your button prevent your users to click on it, basically. So at some point you can make your own choices as long as it's usable.
And we're almost out of time. Gerardo, you're going to have the last few words. Any last tips or solution or tools you recommend to our viewers?
Yeah, so I think, you know, like Grady, a little bit of a shameless pitch. Both A/B Tasty and Flagship are really useful for testing different different stages of the journey. If it's if your product is a web app, and you want to do like those quick UI changes, you can use A/B Tasty. If you want to like actually go deeper and change the logic or the flow or something like that, and you have different ideas or are not sure of what's going to work best for an onboarding of your app, for example. These are all things that you can test with Flagship, and you don't have to test them on your entire user base at the same time. It's really easy to just like launch very targeted tests to make sure that you are actually not going to, like Marine is saying, get in the way of what the users are trying to do by testing bad UX. You can learn really quickly. But other than that, I think just like, we use a lot of like user games with our customers to do, testing and a lot of research at the beginning. And those are really, really important tools for us as well.
Thank you, everyone. We are almost out of time. Usually that's the time where we would ask everyone to just share a lunch together and ask our speaker even more questions. Unfortunately, with the current context, it's going to be a bit harder. That being said, don't despair. We have more coming for you. We have other webinars. Here's just a list of the different webinars coming. You're going to have more information in your emails. Thanks again for joining us. Grady, Marine, Gerardo, thank you for being us and sharing a bit more about your daily life and all your different tips and tricks. I guess last word for you, if people want to ask more questions, what's the best way to reach out?
Email or LinkedIn, I think for me, just happy to answer either.
Same.
Same here. Yeah.
All right. That's it then. Thank you again, everyone. You have a good day. And thanks again.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.